So what we're going to be talking about is really farm succession planning today, and in the context of estate planning and how those two work together. And I'm going to be going through some of the different types of buy-sell agreements that we often use when we try to put together a succession plan for our farmers. And Jim is going to start talk about utilizing life insurance, which often becomes a good way to be able to get the farm to the next generation, to have those cash available for the person who wants to buy the farm, as well as the other heirs who might not be in the farming operation. And then if there's any questions at the end. When we're working with our farm families, the first thing we want to talk about is, really what are the goals that they have? And everybody has a little bit of different goals. One of them might be, I'm just going to retire and I'm just going to sell the farm. And it might be to a non-farm family member or a family member. A lot of times we'll have people who will sell their cattle, their machinery, their equipment, and then rent out their land and buildings. And that works out really well if you have, you're selling it to the next generation and you just want to keep the land to provide you income in retirement, or even selling to a non-farm family member. One of the ways that we see a transition with the farm is people will actually provide those, how they're going to transfer that farm in their will, that they're going to give it to one child or a couple children, even putting in payment options, those kind of things. One of the better ways that we find, especially when you want to try to transfer a farm, is to establish a buy-sell agreement during your lifetime, so that if something happens to you, that there's a plan in place, a written document that says what you want to have happen. Oftentimes we see another way that we transfer a farm is with a contract for deed. If you're selling to a family member, oftentimes you'll enter into that during your lifetime. We also are always looking at, what kind of estate taxes you might have, whether that's federal or state, income tax consequences of what you're trying to do when you're trying to put that succession plan in place. And we also have clients who maybe they don't have any children, and that giving to a charity is important to them. And so we will talk to them about how that they can provide for their charity, as well as to provide income to themselves. And of course, when we talk about succession planning, and if you have children who are in the farming operation with you, that you want to treat all your heirs fairly. That may not be equal, but that you do want to treat them fairly. And so we'll be talking about that too. So what kind of issues affect our farm transitions? Well, number one is a lack of a clear, defined succession plan. We want to make sure that we have a plan in place that's in writing so that we know what's going to happen. The thing we don't want to do is to create conflicts within your family, especially if there are some children who are not in the farming operation. We want to make sure that you still have Christmas and Thanksgiving together, so we want to make sure that that plan is in place. Sometimes there might be more than one child that's in the farming operation. Maybe they're not sure that they want to continue farming, both of them, but we want to make sure that we address the issue of who's going to be able to run that family farm business. The other thing that I always look at, and kind of is at the top of my list when working with clients, is that we want to ensure that the surviving spouse, number one, has income to make sure that they're taken care of during their lifetime, and also that they have somebody who's going to buy that ownership interest that they still hold. So when we're dealing with the farm succession planning, it's really in the context of estate planning. What's going to happen after I die, as well as what's going to happen during my lifetime. And we want to coordinate those two things together. Oftentimes when we have a multi-generational farm family, where you have even grandparents, parents, grandkids, they might all be farming together, and we want to be able to put together a plan that works for them. And sometimes that can't be separated from that estate plan, so we have to make sure that we work that together. And there's a lot of different tools that we can use to get that farm transferred. So really, the family farm succession planning really is part of your estate planning. The future owners of the farm are usually, and many times, going to be heirs in that estate. And usually that farm is a huge part of that estate, and perhaps, 90% of the estate. The other issue that we have is that, that farm certainly can be sold, but if you want to keep it in the family, that farm really is illiquid because you don't want to be selling it. So you may need cash to pay estate taxes, to provide for non-farm heirs. So we want to be able to make sure we can take care of that. And with a buy-sell agreement, we can actually make your estate liquid. And there are a variety of estate planning tools that we can implement with this farm assets. So why should we do farm succession planning? Oftentimes when we meet with farmers, they're like, yeah, we have a plan in place. And we'll ask them, if we can see the document, they go, well, we've talked about it. We know what we want to do. But we want to make sure that we get that in writing. Again, we want retirement income for that eldest generation. We want to make sure that they're taken care of. When we have a succession plan in place, we can separate out the farm part of it from the estate plan. And oftentimes, and I'm going to talk about that, how that works, and that really becomes a great way to do it. We want to acknowledge the fact that the children working on the farm have probably created part of the current value of that farm. And others may not recognize it. Those non-farm family members may not see that as the one working in the farm does. And of course, we always want to protect that debt equity ratio. If you have a child who wants to purchase the farm from you, and you plan to do that at death, will they be able to get a loan? If they have a loan, will that create some issues? So we want to make sure that we take care of that. And of course, we want to always have someone in place to provide continuous management of that farm operation. And at death, we know, especially with the value of land prices these days, that there may be a need for estate taxes, and there may be a need to pay out non-family heirs. So we want to make sure we have that taken care of. So when Jim and I work with our farm families, we really start first with the farm succession planning. And it's really one piece of the puzzle, and we usually take that one first. And the farm operation as a percentage is a huge percentage of that total estate. And that changes over time. As our land prices increase, the value of that farm increases. One of the good things about doing succession planning, putting together a buy-sell arrangement, is that we can kind of separate that farm operation emotionally. If we have everything, the plan in our will, when someone dies, of course, then the heirs get a copy of that will, and they can see what that plan looks like. But if you set it aside and do it in a buy-sell agreement, that's just between the buyer and the seller. And so it kind of keeps the emotions a little bit separated. When you have a plan in place, you will then have the cash available for estate taxes and any settlement costs. And you can also recognize contributions from family members. So if you have individuals who are working with you on the farm, you can kind of provide extra compensation to them to help them purchase life insurance, things like that to recognize their contributions they are making. And it's usually best if we try to avoid the appearance anyway of inequality in the estate plan. And by setting up that separate buy-sell agreement, you can still have in your will that we're going to give everything equally to our kids, but you have this separate agreement on the side. And when we talk about fair, working with our farm families, fair may not always mean equal. And you say, well, why would I want to treat my children unequally? Non-farm children, and I was one of them, they might have received college tuition. I didn't, but I could have. They could have gotten a down payment on a house or other funds. So there's, they might have gotten other assets or other cash versus that that farm child. And certainly the family heir or the farming heir has helped create a value for that business. I had a brother who farmed with my dad, and certainly my dad couldn't have kept farming without him. So there's certainly a value there. And, part of, I think, the farming tradition is keeping the farm in the family, right? So that becomes a value that we want to also have. Now, these farming heirs, they might not have had the same salary as I did, as their, the one on the farm. They usually take a lesser salary than perhaps some of their other family members who are working. And so they might have been underpaid for a period of time, and that's why we might also want to give them a little bit extra when we try to transfer that farm over. And oftentimes that farming heir is there with their parents. In my family, I have one brother. There was 3 girls. We all moved to the Twin Cities, and my brother stayed on the farm with my parents. So he's there, and there's some value to that, because certainly they take care of the parents in ways that people who are not around can't. Now, the biggest problem, I think, for many people is transferring that control, and that becomes something that we all have to be ready to do in order to set up a buy-sell agreement. So certainly the timing of the transfer is important, and you have to be ready. Both you, the person who wants to retire, and the person who's going to take over the farm. You want to make sure that they're ready too. There might be in-law concerns. Oftentimes, sometimes it's not the problem with the family, it's the problem with the in-laws. So we always have to take a look at that and see if there are any concerns there. Also, for the person who is transferring their farm to their family members, they might have some income needs and desires, and we want to talk about those. There might be some younger children that we don't know yet if they might want to farm, so we have to think about that. And there might be some ways to do premiums or discounts when we set up the agreement. But we always want to make sure that we balance our objectives and make sure that we have a proper, appropriate plan for your specific situation. There are a lot of different planning tools that we can use when we talk about farm succession planning. You're probably very familiar with annual gifts, and it was mentioned before that we can give $14,000 per person per year. So I could give you all $14,000 today. And if I asked my husband, he said it was okay, I could give you each 28. So you can use that gifting ability to affect the transfer of your farm. We have that $5 million plus unified credit exemption amount, and we can utilize that in our transfer. Jim's going to be talking a little bit more about life insurance, how that can be used in an appropriate plan for you to do a farm transfer. There are minority discounts that can be used, which allow us to transfer more. A lot of times we use this annual gifting amount, and with the minority discount, we can get the asset over to the next heir more quickly. Sometimes we even set up shadow companies. A lot of times we do this. For instance, you could set up a separate company, and if you want to get the machinery over to your son, you can gift him using the $14,000, the annual gift amount, older machinery that you know you're wanting to replace. He can then put that in his little his little entity. Then he can purchase the new machinery himself and be making the payments on that, or however that's going to be purchased. And over time, you can eventually get all the machinery to that farming son or daughter. And that's how we sometimes use this shadow company. We can do installment sales. Again, over a period of time, selling land or machinery. We can do recapitalizations if we're dealing with somebody that has a S Corp or a C Corp. Sometimes we do self-canceling notes as a way to get the asset transferred over. Some other things, intentionally defective trusts, and even split interest trusts, where there's a charitable beneficiary as well as a regular beneficiary. So there's a variety of ways and tools that we can use to transfer a family farm. I'm going to talk a little bit about using buy-sell agreements. And there really are three different kinds of buy-sell agreements that we look at. One's a cross-purchase plan, a stock redemption or entity redemption plan, and then a combination wait-and-see buy-sell. Now, really, the buy-sell agreement is really just an agreement whereby a shareholder or owner agrees to sell his or her interest either to the corporation or to other owners upon the occurrence of certain events. And so that's just generally what that buy-sell agreement says. So what are those events? It could be the death of a shareholder or an owner, a retirement, upon their retirement that it triggers the buy-sell. If you have a corporation and somebody's an employee of it, you could have if they're terminated or no longer working there, that triggers the event. Or even if there's a bankruptcy or divorce with one of the owners, that may trigger an event, and that the buy-sell would then come into play. So what kind of provisions are in our buy-sell agreement? The buy-sell agreement typically provides for an initial value set forth in that written document. And sometimes that is simply, it may be a specific number, or it may be a formula to arrive at a valuation. And generally the document will also talk about how that number should be annually or periodically reviewed to make sure that you have the correct value for your farm operation. One of the ways that you might do that is to hire an appraiser, certainly to appraise the land, so that you have a market value for that land. Or it could just be a combination of all of those. So now if you have the buy-sell in place and you know that your son or daughter is going to purchase the farm from you, how are they going to finance that purchase? And that's always the million-dollar question. One of the issues that we have is that certainly they could say, well, I'm just going to buy it from you. Now, and you know, we always hear land rich, right? Cash poor. So we might have a farmer that has a lot of land, but not a whole lot of cash sitting around because they keep investing in land and machinery. So the money might be tied up in that farming operation, so that the personal funding is a very difficult thing for that second generation to do. The other thing they might think about is, well, I'm just going to borrow the money. And you certainly can do that. It's a little bit more difficult. You're not guaranteed that you're actually going to get financing. And of course, if you have to make those payments, it could create, there might be credit issues, or it could create financial strain on that farm operation. You could simply, within that company or the organization, create a sinking fund. Again, not guaranteed, and creditors can always get at that sinking fund. One of the things that you could do is set it up so that you have installment payments. And again, that would have to come from the farm cash flow. Again, not guaranteed, because we know farmers' incomes go up and down, and it could put a financial strain on that farming operation. And, you know, we know that future profits, again, depending on the weather, depending on the markets, we don't know what that future profit's going to be. And that's why oftentimes we look at life insurance as one of the options. It might be existing policies, it might be a new policy, to be able to have that cash available when you need it upon a death to purchase that farm interest. There's a wide variety of life insurance products, and Jim's going to talk a little bit about that. And the nice thing is that when you need it, the death proceeds are available, and they're generally tax-free, federal income tax-free. Now, there's a variety of types of buy-sell plans. Again, the cross-purchase, the entity redemption, and the wait and see. Now the cross-purchase plan, if Jim was my dad, I think we're about the same age, so probably won't work, but he could be my dad. If Jim and I were entering into a cross-purchase agreement, in a cross-purchase situation, we'd own policies on each other. Say we're farming together. And we'd have that agreement between the two of us that if something happens, one of those triggering events, that, and he would accidentally die, then the policy that I have on Jim would pay out to me, because I would be the beneficiary of that policy. And now I would have that cash available to buy the farm assets from his estate. And again, those life insurance proceeds come to me tax-free. When I actually purchase his share from his estate, I get a step up in basis. So if tomorrow I say, well, this farming all by myself is a little bit too much, I want to sell, I will have a basis step up and I can sell and avoid a lot of that capital gain. If Jim and I had a situation where we had a corporation that we were farming under, that agreement would be between us and that entity. And that entity, that corporation, would be the one purchasing those life insurance policies on us. Now, if something happened to one of us, that entity then could purchase would have the cash available because they would be the beneficiary of that policy. And again, they would buy our share of the business from our estate. And the proceeds, again, are tax-free. So it allows, again, for that entity to continue on with the remaining owners to run the farm operation. Oftentimes we also look at wait and see buy-sells, which is kind of like a little hybrid buy-sell. And in that situation, the shareholders are given an option. So I can decide if I'm going to purchase Jim's share, or if I decide I'm not going to, then actually the corporation has to buy it. And which, of course, then provides a market for my interest in the business. The policies would, however, be set up as they would in a cross-purchase plan. So Jim and I would own policies on each other. Are there any questions so far? Well, otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to talk about a little bit more about the life insurance planning.